Hey everybody, this is Jason Grimm, Cisco CloudCenter architect, and today I was going to show you some quick tips and tricks on how to use day two lifecycle actions of deployed infrastructure, and specifically some quick S3 and EFS services from Amazon. So what we're looking at here, if you're not familiar with CloudCenter, this is the Cloud Center Manager Web UI. Dashboard over here in Cloud Center Managers, or Cloud Center is a cloud management platform. One of the ways that you can utilize the platform is to manage already deployed greenfield or brownfield infrastructure, and then you've got in the virtual machines context, you've got a lot of things that you can do with that infrastructure. So just clicking on the virtual machines, I can see all of the VMs that have been deployed, and when I can see my cost information and various information about the VM on this first page. Drop down, I've got my day two lifecycle actions. Um, so these are, as I mentioned, things that can be done to the infrastructure after it's deployed. The same scripts and services and integrations can be used within application profiles or as external services to do other things, but today we're going to be looking at VMs that are already deployed. When you click on a VM, you get a lot of information about the VM instance size, public and private IP, host name, where it's deployed, what cloud account was used for when it was deployed, any policies that have been applied, aging policies, scaling policies, security policies, etc. I've got three kind of tabs up here: details, logs, and history. This is what we'll be focusing on today. So I created these 6 buttons. I didn't create the button. It's very easy. I created 6 actions, you could say, that I then applied and made available to this VM. List S3 list S3 buckets or EFS file systems, delete buckets or file systems, and create buckets or file systems. So I'll go ahead and launch one, and then we'll get into how they actually work. And this one, I forced to require the user to put in an access key and ID. It works perfectly fine with IAM as well. And you'll see when we go and look at how the actions are created, you very easily create the inputs that are seen or not seen by a user. Most often, this data that's input is prompted for, then gets passed into the script or service running underneath as variables. And you may opt to, like here, this is a create bucket action, but some use cases you may want users to be able to list and create. I'm sorry, this is the list S3 bucket one that we're looking at here. You may hide or not require AWS access keys for listing or creating, but you do for deleting. I'll show you how you can turn those on and off. So go ahead and hit execute, and what you'll see, you get a little dialog here. What you'll see is that the history shows kind of the events, and then if you look in the logs, you can actually see what's going on. And that is already completed. Yeah, it's 2:03. It was very fast. So I'm piping some things out to the log here. List service starting. I install some prerequisites. Actually, just JSON query to parse and present some of my data. In this example, I'm running it on the VM, and I'm installing the AWS CLI tools. Certainly much more elegant ways to do this. I could have curled right to the API. I could have ran this in a container as an external service, not even on the VM. I just went this route because it was pretty quick and easy. In the script, I output kind of the JSON format of that command, and then I also did a little bit of work. Actually, it was kind of not needed, but I provided both formats. I mean, probably 40 lines of the 100 lines of bash that I wrote was just to do this silly formatting. But at any rate, um, you see a bucket list, names, create date and create times. That all looks good, works fine. I'll go through the EFS1 quickly as well. This is the EFS file system list. This one I believe I didn't prompt for the access key. Just kind of turning that on and off to show you that it's pretty easy to do. I'll execute that. You can see the event pop in here. And in the script, you'll see on the creates and deletes, I actually had to slow it down and put a sleep in because it was listing and then creating. And then the second time it listed again, it was already finished, but AWS hadn't updated yet. But so basically the same context, checks the prereqs, installs and configures the CLI and outputs. EFS obviously has a lot more data around it. It's got the state, encryption enabled, the type of storage, owner ID, targets, size, etc. So I'll go ahead and go into create a bucket real quick. And lucky number 13. The region's not required for AWS, but I was doing a lot of copy and pasting after I started creating these things, so I just kind of left it in there. So on the creates and the deletes, what I did is actually list, before, and then I list after it's created. So I can see my bucket 13 here was indeed created. And what I'll do is I'm just going to go ahead and delete that one that was created. That was S3, right? So what these actions are handy for is as organizations adopt cloud, one of the things that they're challenged with is they may have dozens or even hundreds of folks going out to the cloud, public cloud consoles. Very little governance around cost control or what can be ran, and where and when and why and how long, aging, scaling, all these things. As organizations try and rein that back in from a cost, governance, security, all kinds of reasons why some of that is difficult to manage, certainly at scale. And where CloudCenter can help is not to slow down the users, give them all the functions that they would normally do. In fact, make it even a little bit easier for them, but do it all here, where things can be enabled or disabled as needed. And they've got all the actions that they need, and they can still perform their work quickly, but it's done in a more consistent, concise, predictable, and governed way. So my bucket's deleted. This starts to get anticlimactic, right? The bucket was there before, and not surprisingly, now it's not. I'll go through one more quick EFS create. There you go. Yeah, and this one I left the key request in there. The EFS one's kind of neat. We got all kinds of options here. I chose to do a list drop down. This is the password, free form, obviously. Create token. Lots of flexibility of what you can do, pre and post with these services, the kind of data you can collect and things like that. This one I put a bash calc as I present the storage amount. Had one more requirement to add to do that in bash. Another reason to consider, sometimes it's better to run it in Bash versus curl, because you can do things. I guess you can do some of that manipulation in line, but it gets a little more difficult actually. So I created my new service. That was yeah, my token 13. Here's the file system ID that it created. And just to come full circle, let's go ahead and delete that one. Oh, and the I think I mentioned before, but you'll see in the script I do a list before and after. Okay, so that one's already done, and that actually to be done in a minute. It says the delete is complete, but the second list is still running. So I'll pop it in a minute. Let's look at the. Actually, I already have it over here. Actions library. I guess I was already get out of that one. So I can, as an admin in this tenant, I can turn some of these on and off. And let's look at the create file system. That was the one with the drop down. So I can't change the type on one that's already. You can basically edit everything else, but the types are things like webhooks or once it's already a command or script, that's kind of set. Everything else yeah, it can be changed. Probably set that to 5 minutes if you're doing testing and debugging and you don't want to wait for 20 minutes for something to time out. I mentioned before, run on the machine or run externally. Options to reboot after the machine. Maybe you've ran an update or something like that, or maybe you've attached or detached volumes when you sync the VM information. Object mapping is where this action, so when users log into their tenant, you know, where's this action applied, basically. And what I should have done a little better job here and gone in and said, since this is, well, S3 could run anywhere, but since this is EFS, I'll limit the cloud types where this can run, so somebody on the Azure side doesn't try to run it and get confused when it doesn't work. So here's how you govern where those things can run, even what cloud accounts, OS types, all those kinds of things. So lots of control. So you can create tons of actions and then decide where and when those are available. The executable command is just a link to my GitHub repository. There's no wget, there's no curl, there's any of that. It just assumes when you put something in here, whether it's a local path or a remote path, it's going to get that file and execute it. Here's the fields that you see each time I launch that. AWS region, needed for EFS, not for S3. Again, I left it in there. That one, use the access key ID, make it visible, force the, it's not an optional field. The field type is password. Same with secret key. That's why you get the splats when it comes up. This one's a list with, come to limited drop down and my creation token. So very, very easy. I know my EFS token is limited to 64 characters, so I'll limit that there. Very simple, very quick, very easy. My operators call me up and say, hey, I need to be able to do X, Y, and Z, and I can just create an action for them to do that. And that is executed as root. That's what that warning is for. I won't go through all of them. I'll switch over to the text editor for a minute, and pretty straightforward. More than half of this is comments and white space and some formatting, but what it is, what it does, version, etc. Sourcing these, so these are when you want to call on Cloud Center variables, like cloud types and things like that, that Cloud Center knows about the VM sourcing these scripts and environment variables allow you to pull those into the script. I stayed up here what I'm pulling in at runtime from external versus what I'm initializing within the script. I set some variables. I found that if you're going to do the AWS CLI, the easiest way is just to build out your config file and this JSON export and stuff. I do the query one time and store it locally because I munge and muck with that data and not want to keep hitting the API to do that. So that's why the two files are there. A few functions, install my prereqs, install and configure the AWS CLI. All of this, from the top down is consistent across all of these 6 things that I created. Really, the only this one I'm actually looking at the list. So all of that basically goes into each of my scripts, and the main section I'm just calling the functions here: install the prereqs, install and configure the CLI, and then do the thing I want it to do. And you'll see once I've done one, it's very easy. Here's my EFS create. Here's my EFS delete. Everything else is stock on the creates and deletes. Install prereqs, CLI config, list my EFS, do my function, and list it again, and then log some messages. Pretty quick and dirty, but it works. And sometimes the $5 hammer is all you need. And I built 6 of these today in just a few hours and tested them, and they work fine. And to that point, I've got most of the architects in the team, and I mean most folks in the Cloud Center BU have repos and are doing dev of some sort. Once I get this exactly where I want it, I will post it up here to our public Cloud Center repo, services, callouts, action libraries, all kinds of things. Our partners have various repos. Our customers even have repos. Our hardware vendor partners and software partners are contributing to these as well. Very easy to work with. These lifecycle actions, very easy to write and utilize, and that's one of my favorite parts about Cloud Center is how extensible and kind of exposed everything is, along with all the stuff that comes out of the box. So thanks for your time, and I hope you found this valuable, and talk to you again soon. See ya.